Hi and welcome back everyone to yet another lesson in Python programming. The focus of today's lesson is working with user input in Python. That is to say, capturing user input so we can perform some sort of additional computation. In today's lesson, we are going to discuss the importance of user input and learn how to capture user input for additional computation. Before we dive into our practical demonstration, let's start by defining what user input is. In Python programming, user input refers to any data or information that a user provides to a computer or a system during execution. This input can take many forms, including text, numbers, audio, video, and can be entered using various devices such as a keyboard, a mouse, a touch screen, or even a microphone. In programming languages, user input is captured using input and output functions or libraries that enable the program to read and process the user's input. Once the input is received, the program can perform various operations and calculations on the data to generate output or perform other tasks based on the user's input. Some of the advantages of user input in Python include the following. It allows for customized user experience, shapes the program response, and allows for data to be stored. Now, here is a very basic example of the user input syntax. First, we define a variable called name. We assign the input function with some string that we'd like to print out. We then print a string and concatenate that with whatever the user passed in as an input. Here is a more complicated example of user input combined with exception handling. First, we start off with a while loop. We then try to capture data from the user in the form of an integer. If the user passes in any data type other than an integer, we then print an exception message to respond to the value error. If the user successfully passes in an integer, we then perform some sort of computation. Now that we have a fairly basic understanding of user input in Python, it's time to move on to our practical demonstration. Now, once you've booted up PyCharm, you can simply go ahead and create a new project. So I'll navigate to new project. I'll open the directory over here, and then I'll simply point this to my default folder. Inside of this folder, I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm simply going to call this lesson 3. I'll click OK, make sure that I've expanded this, click OK once again, and now I'll create the project. But before I create the project, notice that my interpreter is missing. So make sure that you navigate and assign the interpreter, in this case, Python 3.11. I'll click on this, click create, and then I'll open this in a new window. I'll click on the break over here to exclude this, and then I'll simply erase all of the boilerplate code. Now, before we get started, what we are going to aim to achieve for this practical demonstration is to build a very basic food ordering system that allows the user to input data and receive the order details. I'll start off by creating two variables. The first variable is going to be option underscore price, which will currently be set to 0. On a new line, I'll create another variable called delivery fee, and this will be set equal to 4. The idea behind this is that if the user opts for delivery, we can charge an extra fee of $4. Next, I'll go and create an instance of a user input. So I'll create a variable called name, set this equal to the input function, and I need to pass in a string over here. I'll simply pass in a string that says enter your name. Next, I'll simply print this out, and I'll pass in a string here as well. I'll say hi, concatenated with the name. That is to say, whatever the user passes in here as a value in this input function will be casted in my print function over here. I'll concatenate this with another string, and that string is going to be how are you doing today. Let's save this. Let's run our code and see what we get. So I'll click on the run button over here. Notice that if I click down, I can actually enter some text over here. So I'm going to pass in the name Jack. And if I hit enter, my prompt responds with, hi Jack, how are you doing today? And that is because I passed in the string Jack over here, and that string was concatenated with the string that we passed into our print statement. Now, this is a very basic approach to user inputs. Let's make our program a little more complex. On a new line at the bottom over here, I'm going to create yet another input. So I'll first create a variable called specials. I'll set this equal to input, and I really think that copying and pasting this string will save us a lot of time. So let's review what we have so far. We have a variable called specials, which is set to an input function. The goal here is to pass in some sort of value based on the specials available. So if we read the string that we have over here, it basically says, here are the specials for today. Please select one of the following. We also have the /n, which just allows us to print on a new line. And in this case, the first option available to us is option number 1, a medium hamburger and fries with a soda, which costs roughly $8. On a new line, we have option number 2, which is a large hamburger and fries with soda that costs $11. And then our third and final special on a new line once again is option number 3, a large pizza and a soda, which costs $15. Great. Now, with all of this out of the way, we have to figure out how exactly it is that we're going to track what the user passes in as an input. Because keep in mind, we want the user to pass in the value 1, 2, or 3 for the specials. Based on the value that the user passes in, our program needs to keep track of which special they'd like to order. Now, the first thing that comes to mind here is that this sounds like a good use case for a conditional statement. So on a new line over here, I'm going to create an if statement. I'll use the specials as part of my condition. And that is to say that if specials is equal to 1, which is a string in this case, this is quite important. Whenever we pass in any value into an input function, it is processed as a string by Python. I'll add my colon at the end. And then I'll call option price, and I'll set this equal to 8. So we are now grabbing the variable we created at the top, which was initially set to 0, and we are setting the price of that equal to 8. That is because we want to store the value of the first option, option number 1, which is $8. Great. Now I'll simply print at the bottom over here. You've selected the medium hamburger and fries with soda. Notice that I'm using double quotation marks over here, and that is because I have a single quotation inside of my string. Now, to expedite the development of this program, I'm simply going to copy this code over here, and on a new line, I'll create an elif statement, and if special is equal to 2, I'm going to opt for the large hamburger and fries with soda. I also want to update the price over here to reflect the price of option number 2, which in this case is $11. So I'll simply add that over here. And then finally, we want to opt for the large pizza and soda. So I'll navigate back, copy this code once again, paste this as a final elif block, and this is going to be option number 3. And in this case, we've opted for the large pizza and soda. Great. The price needs to be updated as well. So I'll alter this to 15 to reflect the $15 charge of this item. Excellent. So on a new line, I'm going to create a new variable called confirm delivery in the event that the user would like to add delivery to their order. They could also decline if they'd like to. So I'll set this equal to input once again, and I'll pass in a string that says something like, would you like to have your meal delivered at an additional charge of $4? The idea is that the user should pass in Y or N as the options, where Y is equal to yes and N is equal to no. So at the bottom over here, I'll create another conditional statement to say confirm delivery. If that is equal to the string Y, then print the following. Your order total is, let's just add a colon over here, a $sign, and then I'll concatenate this with the string conversion function. And that is because we want to convert the integers that we are going to pass through here as strings so that we can concatenate it with the string we've created over here. So inside of this function, I'm simply going to pass in the option price plus the delivery fee. Great. Now we need a condition in the event that the user decides not to opt for any delivery. So I'll grab this over here, copy it because the logic is going to be fairly similar. I'll change this to an else if statement in the event that the first condition is not satisfied. I'll change the confirm delivery to N over here for no. The only change required here is simply to remove the delivery fee, and that is because the user opted not to have their meal delivered. Whereas in the first instance where Y is true, the option price plus the delivery fee must be taken into account for the order total. And that is it. Now, fingers crossed, let's run our code and hope that we don't run into any bugs. So I'll simply run this over here. I'll pass in my name Jack once again. So now I've got a menu presented to me. Hi Jack, how are you doing? Here are the specials for today. Please select one of the following. I'm in the mood for option number 2, large hamburger and fries with soda. So I'll hit enter. At this point, the program notifies me that I've selected the large hamburger and fries with soda. After which I'm being prompted once again to decide whether or not I'd like to have my meal delivered at an additional charge of $4. In the first instance, I'm simply going to say yes. At which point my order has been completed and the system notifies me that your order total is $15. And if we have a look at the price of the large hamburger with fries and a soda, notice that it's $11 plus the $4 delivery fee equates to $15. So we know that our program is working correct, at least in the first instance where we decided to opt for delivery. Now, let's give this another try. I'll run this again. I'll pass in Jack. And this time I'm in the mood for pizza. I'll hit enter. And this time I'll select N or type in N because maybe I feel like going for a stroll and picking up my pizza instead of having it delivered. I'll hit enter. And notice that my order total is now 15. And that is as expected since the pizza special is equal to $15. Had I opted for delivery, my output over here would have been your order total is $19. And that brings us to the end of yet another practical. I really hope that you enjoyed this one because the idea was to tie in some of the things that we've learned throughout the Python course to make it a lot more interactive. In our next lesson, we're going to learn all about handling external files using Python. So for all of that and more, I'll see you in the next lesson. Cheers.